I see a comment in the chat here, so we're going to get into our Q&A here. And that comment says, hey, Jared, converting over from Premiere Pro on a PC and slowly learning the keyframe difference. What's your recommendation method on viewing where the keyframes are and editing their locations on each clip? That's an excellent question. So let's look at that, and then I'll get into my prepared Q&A section. So for those of you that don't know, what is being asked here is essentially how can you edit keyframes? And I'm going to show a couple demos here for keyframes just in case you don't know. I'm going to expand out my clips here so that they're a little bit higher, and I'm going to expand the audio. We'll go that height. So one way that you can add keyframes is to the audio. And I'm just going to hold down the Option key and click on this little line down here to add a couple keyframes. And then I'm going to drag this middle portion here to drag those two keyframes down. So one way that keyframes are used is with audio. And notice my audio volume, I come to this keyframe, which keyframe says at this moment in time, I want this parameter, which right now is the audio level, to be at that level, at -4 dB. And then over time, until this next keyframe, I want the audio to lower, in this case to -50 dB. So with two keyframes, you're essentially making a change in a parameter over time, which in this case, it was audio level, and you can see it very clearly what's happening here. So that's one way that you can add keyframes. Let's look at another way. I'm going to go into the inspector, and what you'll see on the right of almost any parameter that you're looking at, there's this little diamond button that allows you to add a keyframe. So let's do transform, and I'm going to get over to the beach because it's an easier clip to see here. So let's say with this beach clip, we want it to start out like it is here, and then we want to shrink this whole clip down. Probably not a great editing choice, but it will do that, and we're going to do that using the scale position. So if I scale it up, you'll see it zooms in. We're going to scale it down so it's a smaller clip. So I want it to start out at 100%, which we'll do at 100 at this moment in time. I'll click on the keyframe button to add to the scale all parameter, which means at this moment in time, at about 3 seconds, it's going to be that scale. Then I'm going to move the playhead down just a second or two. I'm going to shrink my scale down to make it a smaller clip. And again, I don't know why you'd actually want to do that in most scenarios, but hopefully you can see what's happening. Notice it put a gold diamond next to scale all, which is both X and Y, and it's shrinking down. So that means over time, if we skim across this, you can see that essentially with those two keyframes, we're scaling down the picture. So the question in the chat was, what's the recommended method of viewing where the keyframes are and editing their location on each clip? And I'm assuming that means in time, because your keyframes can be with any parameter. So in the inspector, we can certainly click on these little navigation buttons to navigate between the two keyframes, but it doesn't allow us to change where they are in time, right? So let me change the size of the timeline. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. I'm going to shrink down the height of the clips just to make this a little bit easier to see. So Final Cut has a really cool feature called the Video Animation Editor. And you can right-click on a clip, and there's an option here that says Show Video Animation, or you can just use the shortcut Control-V. And Control-V is the answer to your question. Use Control-V. When you do that, it shows you this video animation section here, and now we can see our keyframes. I'm set to transform all. I could go down here and choose just the scale or a different parameter, but if I do that, notice we have our keyframes listed right here, and if I wanted to change this, I just click and drag those keyframes to the left or to the right, and that changes their position in time. So that's the way I recommend doing that. If you're new to Premiere or new to Final Cut, moving over from Premiere makes perfect sense. I'm sure you understand what keyframes are and how you would use them. But this feature, being able to show the video animation editor, allows you to move those in time. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm sure I've done it in a shorter video, but in a previous episode of Final Cut Pro Help Live, I did cover this animation editor in a lot greater detail, so I'd recommend going back and watching that if you can. There's ways that you can go in and solo these so you don't see all of them, and some other things you can do with this. There's also an audio animation editor. If you do a lot with audio effects, you can also use that as a way to reposition those keyframes. So it's a great feature of Final Cut. Many newer editors don't use it because they're not getting into that much detail with keyframes. However, as you do, you're going to want to refine those by a couple seconds. Instead of deleting the keyframe and then going and positioning it somewhere else, use that animation editor. And again, that's just right-clicking, saying Show Video Animation. You can use Control-V, or it's also up in the menus somewhere. Okay, the next question I got here was from Philippe, who tweeted at Final Cut Pro Help, asking if anybody was having rendering issues with Final Cut Pro 10 in the latest Mojave update. And specifically when background rendering is on in Final Cut Pro 10, his interface Final Cut